Well, hello, Viva Birdos. Welcome back to another VEB podcast. We are here today with our 2023 season review. The season is in the books, and it is one for the forgetting books. Definitely not one for the history books. I think we're all pretty much ready to put this behind us. I can tell by reading the comments on the site and kind of seeing what all of you are interested in. You're ready to talk off season, but we've got to talk about what happened this season. 71 wins, 91 losses for the 2023 St. Louis Cardinals. And it was just a slog fest the whole time through. So we are here today. I don't know how it will look when we actually record this, but I've got Adam on my left, Gabe, Heather, and Blake. Adam, how's it going, man?
It's great, man. Newly employed full time, so getting ready to, finally get in the full swing of things. So happy about that.
Awesome. Gabe, we still have Miles Mikolas, but are you keeping the stash all winter? What's your plan with that?
I don't have any plans. I don't know. I'm just kind of rolling with it.
Just rolling with it one day at a time.
Yeah.
Heather, where's your mustache, Heather?
I should shave my mustache. I'm so sorry. I couldn't be matching Gabe. So
And Blake, we got Blake with us as well. Blake, how's it going?
Good. I'm excited for some playoffs.
How was Paris or London? Paris,
London. It was London.
It was London. You didn't go on to Paris? If you make it all the way to London, you should go on to Paris.
We went the other way and went to Scotland.
Oh, that's okay. No, fair.
That's
That's
cool.
fair.
Cool.
That's
I actually preferred Scotland to London, but they were both really cool.
Cool. Was that vacation or was that business?
Yeah, it was vacation. It was my dad's 60th birthday, so we did a big family trip.
Awesome. Well, you didn't miss anything while you were gone.
I did not.
And welcome back. Well, guys, let's just jump into it. We got a lot to cover today. Got a whole season to evaluate, and then we can move on to off-season content. So let's just start with this. Let's just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off and go with the bad stuff first. What went wrong this season? What happened? How did it happen? We can just kind of break that down. And so I'll just let you guys jump in there, and we'll start with what I started with. Adam, what went wrong this season? What do you want to talk about?
Well, that's a loaded question. Where do we start?
Yeah.
I mean, we could just kind of break down. Just in general, I feel there was because we're kind of breaking it down more specifically later on. Just overall, broadly, I feel like there was a lack of coordination amongst the team. They never really got that chemistry going. You saw the run differential not really tell the full story. The Cardinals were kind of underperforming what they should have been. They should have been playing a lot better as a result of how they were scoring. So that was not great to see, and obviously it dipped as the season went by. But really, they couldn't really get on the same page, and we'll get more into that, obviously, more specifically as the show goes on. But overall, I just really feel like it was difficult for everyone to really come together. And we've seen the team go on spit out some of these huge winning streaks, and it really didn't happen this year. They couldn't really click. So hopefully, they could reset this offseason and head into that next year.
So the Cardinals' Pythag record, by the way, this is a lot of categories. Let me see if I can't find it. Pythag win-loss record was 71-91. So it ended up being exactly what you'd expect. But you got to think that a lot of that's influenced by the last couple months of play where they traded everyone away. I know heading into the trade deadline, it wasn't quite that bad. But then once they shipped all their free agents away, they really were that bad of a team. So.
Mm-hmm.
Gabe, what do you think, man?
Defense. Basically, that's what went wrong in April, May, in the first half, really, but specifically April. For some reason, Arenado was a below average defender. For some reason, Tommy Edman was a below average defender. Both guys were at the top of their field in there. Jordan Walker tested the limits to how bad you could really be as an outfielder in April specifically. He's got better as the season goes along, but we now know what the bar is, I guess. And Wilson Contreras, I think, had a really rough April. Not necessarily all his fault, but I do think he had a rough April with game calling, and it just led to it was sort of I don't think he had gelled with the pitchers quite yet at that point. And I throw that in the defensive bucket as well. And then Tyler O'Neill was a center fielder for April, and he wasn't that good in center field. So, I mean, it was pretty much just Goldie and whoever played left field was good. and second baseman was okay. That was from a pretty good defensive team last year. That'd be my number one cause. Obviously, there was more.
Yeah, I was just looking it up here. In not the best defensive stat, but an easy one for me to find in DEF, which is Fangraph's sort of cumulative defensive, metric that they threw up there with WAR, a negative 44.4, which is pretty miserable. By the way, almost half of that was Jordan Walker by himself. So, poor kid. In OAA, a stat that we actually put more respect in, Cardinals were 19th in the league, -6 in OAA, so below average, fairly well below average, in outs above average on the season, which seems like it's got to be their lowest total in that stat, probably since the creation of that stat, which is not very old. So,
And that includes Edman and Arenado kind of bouncing back defensively. So I think the first half really derailed the season.
yeah. Blake, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I look at hitting. I think the team just forgot how to hit with runners in scoring position for like the last 6 months, which it's kind of tough to score runs when you load the bases with no outs or one out and can't get anybody in for the entire season. So that was rough. And then I think too, the bullpen was just never really great. And I mean, I know the pitching staff as a whole wasn't great, but if you actually break it down, the Cardinals' first half pitching staff before the deadline, the starting rotation was 10th in WAR. Like the ERA was a little bit high, FIP was a lot nicer. Like the rotation really wasn't bad until they traded everybody away. But the bullpen first half was 16th, second half was worse. It was bad a lot of the times. And I will say it did feel like at times they had to eat a lot of innings, which probably didn't help either. So just not really being able to score runs in key spots, and then bad defense and a bad bullpen. It's a tough combination.
Yeah, looking at it right here, not to be the stats guy today, but that's kind of the role that I play often in this. The Cardinals, for the first time that I can remember, ended up with a pretty significant gap between their FIP and their ERA. Normally their ERA is just a hair lower than their FIP. That's just sort of where they've been because they play good defense and they've got a pitcher's ballpark. This year, 4.43 FIP, not bad, not great, not bad. 4.83 ERA. So they're just simply allowing more runs than they should have, and that sure shows up in the standings. Heather, what about your thoughts? Do you have anything about it? What went wrong for you watching this team and covering this team this season?
I was looking into this a little bit the other day when I was kind of doing my last preview of the season post thing. And it's a combination, I think, of what everyone's already said, which is the first thing, and this kind of relates to chemistry maybe, is they got off to a terrible start. April was terrible. And sometimes when things are tumbling downhill in the bad way, really hard to get back on track after you already feel like the season's lost. So, that's one of them. The other one is the sequencing. Horrible. This is kind of the runners in scoring position thing. I've never seen them I personally haven't seen sequencing quite like that, at least anecdotally. It just felt so unlucky because they had a top 5 offense for most of the year, even after I think they traded some players away. And then the starting pitching was middling, if you look at FIP. So the sequencing, I think, was just really rough, which gets back to maybe they shouldn't have, whoever drew the ear of that vengeful witch that put a curse on them, don't do that again, maybe. Maybe that's part of the problem too.
The revenge of the sage. The sage like brought in a witch or something, and then
right. Like, I'm sorry, they can be disguised, so you have to just be kind to everyone. That's a good rule. If you've not seen Beauty and the Beast, so and then the last thing is I think they had some injury issues, maybe even some that weren't quite as public. We sort of talked a little bit about this, that maybe there was some injuries with Arenado that he was facing and not mentioning and making public. Tyler O'Neill got hurt pretty early on, so there was no production from him for most of the season. it just was a recipe for a factor of things that ended up being kind of unpredictable, at least to me. I would have never guessed.
Yeah. Obviously, I agree with all of you guys and all those points. I think we covered kind of the spectrum of things, sequencing, defense, FIP, pitching, bad luck, injuries, all of that factors in. I guess the one thing that I would say, and I wrote about this, I don't know, a month or two ago, probably not 2 months, but at least a month ago, is that, usually in a season like this, the Cardinals are used to having somebody step up and perform in an unexpected way. Someone hit that 80, 90, 100th percentile production range that is unpredictable, but you could practically rely on it every season. And this year, I mean, find me a player that hit even their 70th percentile projection. I mean, maybe Nolan Gorman, maybe, but probably only because projections would have been low for him because he was essentially just a second-year player. I think Gorman exceeded our expectations as writers and analysts, but he didn't blow them away. And so there really wasn't anyone on the team, except maybe if we had kept Jordan Montgomery for the whole season. There wasn't anyone on the team that really just defied expectations and carried the team to places that they shouldn't, otherwise have gone. And I think we went into the season kind of expecting that out of someone like Nootbaar. Maybe someone might have said that O'Neill was going to bounce back. A few of us were idiots and thought that Steven Matz was primed for a good season. Don't know who that was. Won't raise my hand. So, I mean, there's, we made these predictions, some of it in fun, but the reality is that practically no one stepped up to perform at the level that we needed to. Even Jordan Walker had a great rookie season, but that was countered by, unfortunately horrendous defensive play. So even that, you can't even say, well, who would have thought that Jordan Walker was what did he end up with, by the way? Like a 120 WRC plus. I don't have the stats in front of me. I'm just saying it's around there, that would have been awesome, but then he loses all of his value on defense. So anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, from injuries to sequencing to batting to pitching to FIP to ERA luck. Everything did, and that's how you end up with a 91 loss season in a town like St. Louis with a roster that we all thought was a playoff team. And so, yeah, it sucked, but it also was what it was. Any more general reaction to that? Is there anything we didn't say or anything you guys want to say about that, the sequencing, or what they could have done differently in light of what was happening?
One thing I will say, go ahead, Heather.
I was gonna say, did anyone feel like when they gave up home runs, it was always like crushing multi-homer,
especially early
late
in the
inning
season?
Yeah. I don't know. I would like to look into that maybe more to see, because I had a little bit earlier in the season, but I want to see kind of what it finally ended up being, because I think they were like either first or second in their percentage of home runs that they had given up being multi-run home runs. Like it just seemed like it was never just a solo shot. It was always devastating and several runs. But that's the only other thing I had to add. I will be quiet now.
I almost feel like that's the pain of each previous home run adding on to the next one, and it's just like builds up over time. But no, I was just gonna say that one thing, Jason, I will say, in somewhat of a pushback, is that I would say that maybe Steven Matz somewhat exceeded my expectations this season, just simply because the Cardinals paid for a 4-starter and got that with Steven Matz. Even though if it came out of a bullpen for some of those innings, he had to do it. The overall value in the aggregate was there, and he only pitched. What was it? I mean, he didn't pitch the full season. It was probably like 3/4 of a full year.
105 innings.
And even then, not even. So like maybe 60% of a full season, and they got extremely good value for someone who pitched only 100 and some odd innings. So even if it came out of the bullpen, I will say I was shocked by Matz and how much value he actually provided this year. So I'm excited to see what he brings next year.
I would say Matz was who we thought he was, like kind of who we hoped he would be, but then he didn't stay healthy. And so 105 innings, and 2 F-WAR. Well, yeah, I mean, you're looking at a 3.6 F-WAR season, 3.8 if he had stayed healthy. But again, because this has been the thing with Matz, he didn't. So, he was good when he was in there, but he wasn't in there enough. So,
I'll also sort of add to the 90 percentile thing. I think Jojo Romero probably did.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably his 90 percentile. And then
example.
the 90th percentile for Jordan Walker offensively, I remember this, or 80th percent or something like that, was a 110 OPS plus because Zips uses OPS plus.
Yeah.
And so offensively, he pretty much maxed out on his
He did.
percentile
Yeah.
almost. Obviously, it's also for the defense. I believe his defense can get to a respectable level, maybe not good, but respectable. Then I would use him as a huge stepping stone for the future, honestly.
Yeah.
Reason for
Yeah.
optimism, basically.
Right. And I think, and again, though, I think that's sort of what it's what I wrote about, at least whenever I did. Jojo Romero wasn't part of it, but that's a great example. Jojo Romero completely outperformed all expectations, 1.2 FWAR from the bullpen. He didn't even see the bullpen probably until May, maybe June, so it wasn't even part of the plans. And then he blows up. And so, it's just, even when they were right, the Cardinals couldn't get it right this year.
Then he got hurt.
Yeah, then he got hurt. It was just sort of destined to be down. Jordan Hicks had the best season that we've seen from Hicks, except, as Heather mentioned, giving up all those home runs early. 4 or 5 losses there early in the season, and then the team was pretty much out of it from there. So, all right, that's enough, right? I mean, we've talked about this now for 6 months. We've written about it. That's enough to be said. Dig deep, fellas, and Heather. What went right this season? Like, what are we excited about? What can we celebrate? What went right? And I'll do the backwards thing here. We started with Adam, so we'll go now to Blake. Always optimistic, Blake. Tell me something that went right, man.
I mean, the Cardinals didn't lose 100 games, so that was nice.
There you go.
But I mean, in all seriousness, Nolan Gorman looked better on defense.
Yeah.
I think that was big. And I mean, we just talked about Jordan Walker kind of hitting his 90th percentile outcome as a rookie, at least offensively. So, I mean, we look at that. Like, Gorman's defense improving is obviously huge. I think those two players are going to be big parts of the future, unless Gorman somehow finds himself in the trade package in the offseason, but I wouldn't expect that. So, I mean, that's probably about it. We hit Jojo Romero. I mean, there's not a whole lot there, so we'll stick with the young guys.
Heather, what went right?
I have a few, but I will leave them in case anyone else wants to use them. If they don't, I'll say them at the end. But I got one for sure. Adam Wainwright, 200 wins. I'm going to miss that guy. It makes me terribly sad to think of the Cardinals without Wainwright or Molina. But good for him. He can ride off into the sunset. I wish it was a prettier sunset, but it's a sunset nonetheless.
Yeah. They gave him a Hall of Famers going away party, which I thought was very appropriate, even though I wrote about this the other day, Wainwright's not a Hall of Famer and won't make the Hall of Fame and probably doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But as a person, as a personality, as a figure in St. Louis, he deserved that moment, and it was everything we hoped it would be, except for maybe, striking out there in that final plate appearance. But I mean, what do you, we can't ask for much more than that. But yeah, I really want to pet the dog, and I really want to play that guitar.
Yes.
But other than that, it was beautiful. It's great. It's fantastic.
I do love the letting him hit. Like, why not? And so I thought that was kind of nice. I thought it wish the season went better, but as far as send-offs go, it's kind of not a blessing that they were not good, because I guess they could have been doing so good that they had wrapped it up and like had it wrapped up and nothing mattered that way. But the fact that nothing mattered meant that they could kind of just it's freeing in a way. Like, none of this matters, so let's just do whatever we want. That's my optimistic view of it anyway. But
yeah. Okay, so you got some more. We're going to come back to you in case someone else mentions this. So we'll just go on up to Gabe. Gabe, what went right?
I got a good one.
Okay.
The trading deadline.
Yeah.
The deadline went very, very right. They did fantastic at the deadline. Restocked the farm system to the point where the Cardinals find a free agent who requires a draft pick, it's not going to hurt as much because they basically infused a bunch of talent in the high minors. Very young guys. I'm shocked by how many guys they got who are either in AA or AAA who are like 21 or 22. For like 2 months of Hicks, Montgomery, and Flaherty. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. So yeah, the trade deadline was probably the thing that went the most right for the Cardinals this season, I would say.
Fair enough. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But very true. Yeah, well, I won't break that down, but really pleased with what I saw from Roby at the end of the season, and Rom, I mean, made it to the majors. King made it to the majors. Anytime you get major leaguers out of a trade deadline and throw in pieces, you're doing something. So
And Roberse struck out like 25 batters in his last 3 starts
Yeah.
after being very good in his first few starts.
yeah, they should have left him in Double-A, but that's okay. We'll get to that in our next podcast. Well, I've got some thoughts on that. So Adam, go ahead. Your what you liked from the season.
Yeah, so I'll get a little bit more specific and say that I'm very glad that, I thought I was very possible with going into the season. Jordan Walker's barrel accuracy wasn't the greatest to the point where we could potentially have a black swan event with his offensive production, right? Where, and then now throughout the season, as that progressed, his ground ball rate decreased and he was making more contact. And, he's still swinging and missing, but, his lever is pretty long because he's a 6'5". But the fact that he's, at least shown like drastic improvement as the season's gone by, especially in September with the defense, and was no longer just like unplayable. At least he was at least fringy. That combines with the fact that he's hitting the ball consistently in the air, and even though if he was doing it at the expense of power, I think he can add that on as the season goes on next year. And the fact that we have a very solid potential 40 home run hitter and is actually going to be solidified, and we allayed some of those swing and miss and putting the ball in, some of those vertical barrel variability like questions. We kind of set those aside, and we've now have a really good guy who potentially be the anchor of this offense once Arenado and Goldschmidt retire, and they can hand the keys over to him.
Yeah. For me, I've got a couple ways that I could go with this. I think just sticking with ones that we haven't mentioned, one thing that went right in one very specific sense, two things that went right in very specific senses. One is Wilson Contreras, in that you're talking about a 31-year-old catcher who played DH, probably shouldn't be behind the plate, and you start to worry about his offense, his knees, things like that. No concerns about his offense. Absolutely as advertised as a hitter. He seemed to sort of stabilize behind the plate as the season went along. I'm not a great, analyst when it comes to catchers. I really need those metrics, and we just don't have those with catchers. So, but as far as a hitter of the baseball, Wilson Contreras did what we expected him to do, and that's a good thing. Same thing similarly to Lars Nootbaar. Nootbaar, you could say, had a disappointing season, but in some ways we confirmed what we didn't know about Nootbaar, in that he is a legitimate major league player who could at times be a major league star. And we thought that after last season. We had hopes for that. And now in a slightly down season with some injuries again, he still had 3.2 FWAR, still had a walk rate over 14%. Still looks like if he can just have one season or two seasons where things kind of come together, he's a 4 or 5 F4 player. Stick him in center field, add to that. So Nootbaar also kind of is a positive, while kind of also being a negative because he didn't play the whole season. And the last two that I have, again, I'm kind of making caveats on these, is that somehow we have successfully transitioned to the Win, Walker, Herrera era. And we don't know how that will play out next season, but all three of those players look like major league players who are in line for significant playing time next year and could be the core of a talented team over the next 4 or 5 seasons. That needed to happen. It did happen. Some of it came at the cost of injuries and trades, but I think we can be fairly optimistic about all three players going forward. Walker definitely next year, and all three of them going forward in the future, that there's some talent there. And
if we don't trade Herrera.
Do what?
Yeah.
If we don't trade Herrera.
Yeah, they could be traded. I mean, they could. We don't know yet, but as far as those three players, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about them being major leaguers and contributing at the major league level, which we weren't sure about entering the season. So in a very poor season, those are about as good of positives as I can come up with that you guys haven't already mentioned. Heather, you had a couple more. Bring us the positives. We want them. Bring them to us.
Okay. I was going to talk about Wilson Contreras too, because I thought after sort of, I don't know if it was really a shaky start to the season. Well, offensively it kind of was, and then all that stuff came out about his pitch calling or whatever. I thought that really sort of sorted itself out and disappeared as a story. So, and he ended up hitting about how he hoped he would. So, I thought that was kind of a plus. And then the other thing is Paul Goldschmidt, still really good at baseball, still really good at hitting the baseball and also catching the baseball. I think his, what is that called? Exit velocity.
Yeah.
I went and looked it up because I remember when I was writing recaps and stuff, I'd look at the top exit velocities of the game, and he's always at least in the top 5 almost every time. And I think according to Baseball Savant, he is in the 93rd percentile. Let me find it. And hard hit percentage.
Yeah.
I can't find his exit velocity real like super fast, but
91.3.
What is it?
91.3.
So that seems pretty good.
Better than last year. Better than last year.
He's real good. And that's nice to see, especially, with his contract and age and all that stuff. So good for him.
I hate to do instant, like, in-depth statistical analysis, but just glancing at his Baseball Savant page, better exit velocity. The noteworthy thing is that his average launch angle dropped by 3 degrees. So balls that should have left the park last year now were line drives or grounders, and that accounted for his drop in ISO, which is what dropped his WRC plus. And then along with the drop in BABIP, he wasn't going to have what he did last year, but that's probably what kept him from being a 4 or 5 WAR player again this year. So a little shift.
Wasn't his ex-WOBA basically the same as last year somehow?
Yep, exactly the same.
Is it exactly the same?
Exactly the same. 367. Yep.
Classic. Very on brand.
Yeah.
But his defense still looks great. I just remember, I just anecdotally still with defense, but I remember just seeing him. He can pick it. So good for him. Good
and
for Paul.
That's the weird thing about Goldie too, because his defensive metrics at least are better than they were last year. His exit velocity is better than it was last year, and his xWOBA was the exact same. So if you would have told me that his WAR cut in half, I would be shocked. But that's
that's BABIP for you, man. I mean, BABIP will that's what makes MVPs. We don't talk about it. We talk about players being great hitters, but MVPs are made off of career BABIP seasons. They just are.
It's the curse. Should not have offended that witch.
And his BABIP was 327. It wasn't even that bad this year, but actually 327 is fairly low for Goldschmidt, relatively speaking. He's so consistent. But I think you're right. I mean, like, I remember coming into this season thinking if he could go 4 more years or so and go like 4, 3, 2, 1 and FWAR stepping down, he's a lock for the Hall of Fame. And he basically did that. And there's no reason to think that he's going to drop to a 2.5 or a 1.5 next year, barring injury. We can't predict that, but if he stays healthy, he's going to be a serious hitter next year too. All right, so go ahead, Adam. No, go ahead, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, to hop up on what Blake said in terms of the xWOBA being the same as it was last year. I feel like last year he might have outperformed his expected stats, and that kind of led to the MVP caliber season. There were probably other guys who had better batted ball results, and this year he just kind of got the minus of that expected value. So it went the other way.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So this leads us perfectly into our next topic of conversation. I want to dig a little bit more into the stats here, just like we're doing with Goldschmidt. And let's kind of evaluate the roster. I don't want to go player by player because with this team, there's way too many players for us to dig in on. We got the whole offseason to do that. I'm going to have a whole slew of review articles and do some real player analysis for a change. But I want to go position group by position group, starting with the infield. And so we talked about Goldie. And so for the rest of the infielders, we have, I guess if we started with the intended starting lineup, Edman, Gorman / Donovan, Arenado. We talked about Contreras. what's our take on the infield? Who are that you guys want to start talking about? And I guess I'll start with Gabe since Adam just spoke. So Gabe, your evaluation of the offensive group starting infield.
Mostly except the left side of the infield defensively at this, like the first half was a huge disappointment. And I think Arenado's offensive stats were a huge disappointment too overall.
Yeah.
But aside from that, everybody else pretty much played up to expectations. And Paul DeYoung surprised us by being pretty solid while he was here. I know he kind of collapsed for other teams, but I mean, if you look at each individual player who played in the infield, I mean, they were all above average. Even Arenado in a down year was clearly an above average player. Anybody would put a third, second, short, or third. And before September, when we played Curacudo and Jose Fermin and everybody and Irving Lopez trying to get his first hit, before we did all that, pretty much everybody pretty much played. I have no complaints about the infield, basically, and I see no reason for worry next year either.
Adam, what went wrong with Arenado this year? Have you looked at his stats in depth?
Yeah. So, I mean, with the thing with Arenado, if you take a closer look at his OAA and a breakdown by month, I believe that, the only really downside is that it was May, June was the only time that he actually played like absolute like dog crap on defense, right? Where defensively every other month he's basically been Nolan Arenado if you break it down, and that's really cost him about a total like maybe at least one WAR on defense throughout the course of those 2 months. So there's plenty of different reasonings that could be for that, where guys tend to play through injuries all the time. Especially with a guy like Nolan Arenado who has a history of playing almost every single year or every single game every single year. And he wants to continue that pace. And, he's a very, very tough guy. And these guys are, built like to play some of these or built to play through this. So I think I'm not worried about Arenado's defense at all, just simply because a guy like a Platinum Glover just doesn't go from 100 to 0 at that snap of a finger without something going on. We've talked about potentially, Jeff wrote about that it could be like a motivation issue. I tend to disagree with that. But my personal hypothesis that he might have been playing through an injury, just simply because, with Major League Baseball players, I don't think you don't need to motivate them. They're not little leaguers picking dandelions in the outfield, right? These guys are professionals. So I think that's probably not the reason why, but I do think it's probably more of an injury problem and not so much a skill issue or a motivation problem.
Did you guys catch any reporting about an injury? I'm not trying to question. I'm just curious.
It's purely hypothetical on my end because we do see this with other players. They do play through injuries and then they reveal at the end of the season, or sometimes they don't.
I'm not seeing a lot in his stats that I find concerning. I mean, like everything kind of dipped, but not in a huge way. I mean, he's not a big walk guy, but his walk rate dipped a little bit. His BABIP was down a little bit, but you look at his StatCast stuff, his average, he's not a huge exit velocity guy anyway, but that was stable. His max exit velocity was stable. His hard hit rate, stable. It really kind of boils down to the fact that he hit too many balls on the ground and not enough balls in the air. And sometimes that happens and it can steal a lot of runs from you when your game. I mean, let's be honest, Arenado's game is primarily home runs. And so when some of those balls are now lower than they should be and become outs, well, it steals a lot from your production. And then you combine that with his, let's just call it a blip, his defensive blip. And yeah, that was a killer for him. But I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but and you guys can look at it in depth. Maybe I'm not seeing anything that concerns me for next year. Anybody seeing anything at all that you're worried about for next year?
Not really, honestly. And I mean, when you look at like his monthly splits, he was terrible in the first month of the season and then really good for 3 months. And then right after the trade deadline fell off again. So like, I mean, that could maybe add fuel to the like lack of motivation fire if that's a storyline people want to believe in. So maybe otherwise I don't really know how to explain him being bad for the final 2 months of the season. But it just kind of is what it is. I think really the only thing that cautions me about Arenado is that he's 32 years old now and has had terrible chase rates throughout his career because he's literally just a guy who swings at everything, hits the ball in the air and pulls it so it goes over the fence. And guys with bad chase rates tend to fall off the cliff a little bit earlier. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's going to be the case for Arenado, especially since his defense is going to give him value, but just something to maybe have a little bit of caution about.
Yeah. And even with that, in a down season, the worst season, of his career, basically, except for the shortened 2020, 2.6 FWAR. When we know, that's his baseline. That's the bottom, right? So not great, but at worst, he's like a better than average third baseman. So not much to worry about there. What about the rest of the infield? I'll go ahead and offer one. One of the things that I was most disappointed with this season was Tommy Edman. His offense was pretty much where you would expect it to be. I kind of was hoping he wouldn't fall all the way back to the low 90s, high 80s in WRC plus, but he did. He played a lot of time in center field, which we've had some opinions about in the past, but he had the opportunity to fight off Mason Wynn and secure shortstop long term defensively, and he just didn't do it. He only ended up with 396 innings at shortstop. He actually did end up with a +4 OAA there, which wasn't the case early in the season. He must have bounced back fairly strongly. But in a season that I felt like he could just secure shortstop and put up another 3 to 5 WAR season, he didn't do it. He took another step back in his walk rate. His wasn't expecting much out of his power, but again, his BABIP dropped, and that made him into a very mediocre player that looks like a utility, not a utility player. What's the word? Platoon player. More than he would be the full-time starter that we saw last year. And, that just disappointed me. That's all. Probably shouldn't have expected what I expected out of him, but I did. And he didn't meet my expectations. And now he's going to be struggling to find, I'm sure he'll have a full-time role next year, but he's going to have to find his place on the field because he's not going to just have a starting spot handed to him. So, do you guys agree with that or not?
I think he'll have a start. If he's here, he'll have a starting spot. Probably. Well, it depends on if Mason Wynn, but that's for another chat.
It is. Yeah. It depends on where. Like, he could be center field starter. He could be shortstop. He could be second base. But there's a guy I'd rather have start at each one of those positions. So he'll find the field, no doubt about it. So anyway, other infield takes.
I do agree that his season was disappointing. That was one of the things that stood out. And I also agree that I think my expectations might have been a little too high for him. But I like the idea of him. And so then I want it to work so badly because I like the idea of this switch hitting, scrappy utility, kind of can play everywhere sort of guy.
Yeah.
And it's a valuable player, what he's able to do, but I want it to be more than it is. So I agree.
I'm right there with you. I agree, Heather. Yeah.
One thing I will say about shortstop is that I will say that I don't think Mason Wynn has earned the full-time job yet, at least at short. So I think at least for the time being, I would de facto slot Tommy Edman in at shortstop, and whenever he needs to take over at center field, because whenever it's not, still a question mark out there, or if there is one starting in opening day next year, hopefully there's not. But I do think that Tommy Edmonds is still probably your opening day shortstop next year, maybe not Mason Wynn, because I don't think I've seen enough for Mason Wynn, even at AAA, to really feel like he merits to be a full-time player. I still think he needs more time to cook.
I would agree with your sentiment. The pushback that I would offer is that I realize seasons change, things change, but Edman has only started 1, 2, 3. This is really boring podcast, me counting out loud. Basically, since mid-August, he started 3 games at shortstop for the Cardinals from there forward. And so you would expect someone that they kind of had earmarked as a starting shortstop going into next year to start more games than that at the position. And he didn't. Not because of performance, mostly because of other needs in other places, but it's telling that other guys got starts over him even after they traded DeYoung. So
it's just Wynn, basically, though.
Yeah, when I would have to look back through there, but I remember, some games where Motter was starting at shortstop and a few other things. Look, I'm not trying to make a big deal of it. I'm just saying that he didn't, he didn't push Win out at the end of the season, which leads me to think that it's going to be hard for him to push Win out heading into next season. So
I don't think that's comparable, but
yeah, I think the point is that we don't know yet. I think that's really what it is. We don't know, and so we'll have to see. Okay, that's probably good on the infield. Let's move on out to the outfield now. Going all the way back to the beginning of the season, I think most of us expected the starting outfield. Well, let's go preseason. Starting outfield would have been O'Neill, Carlson, Nootbaar, or some combination like that. It ended up mostly being Walker, Nootbaar, and I mean, who had the third most starts? Maybe Burleson, So outfield takes. We'll start with Blake.
Yeah.
Blake, the outfield was kind of a mess all season long.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a mess, and part of it was the Cardinals doing, and part of it wasn't. Like
Yeah.
the Taylor O'Neill injuries, Lars Nootbaar injuries, Dylan Carlson injuries, underperformance from Dylan Carlson and O'Neill at times kind of contributed to just a lot of bodies moving in and out. But I think they also added some ambiguity to an outfield that looks solid when they decided to start Jordan Walker on the opening day roster, despite him not pretty much ever having played the outfield in his life. So, I mean, the season's over now, so there's really no point in debating the merits of that decision. But I think honestly, looking forward, like it's pretty much two solid starting outfielders of that group, and Lars Nootbaar and Jordan Walker, and then I really don't know what's going to happen with O'Neill. I tend to think O'Neill's not going to be on the roster next year, but who knows with Dylan Carlson.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Blake, except for the fact that I would say that I'm so scared that the third spot, there's such a drop off between Lars Nootbaar and Jordan Walker after those two, that for the third spot, that because I don't believe in Dylan Carlson at all, and I think it's and all ordinarily I would want to trade a guy like Tyler O'Neill in his last year of team control, and that makes all the sense in the world to do that by the book. But I would feel that the value that you would get from Dylan Carlson would not exceed the fact that what you would get potentially from a guy like Tyler O'Neill in a year where you're trying to, potentially contend again, and you need all the star power you can get. Even if it's for that 1 year, you might need to look at this as like where you're trying to acquire. You need to look at Tyler O'Neill like he's a rental piece, right, with 1 year left to go. And then you probably worry about it in July, or you just let him go in the off season. But I think if you're trying to contend, I think Tyler O'Neill needs to be a part of that team and at least starter it somewhere. If he's not on there, you need to find a replacement in the outfield, because I don't think Dylan Carlson is a major league caliber outfielder, at least right now. And I would rather have some other team figure it out instead of the Cardinals.
If I can get Baseball Savant to play along with me, I've got a little game for you guys that I want to play. Just give me 1 second here. I think it's going to do it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Who had the higher exit velocity on Baseball Savant, Dylan Carlson or Tyler O'Neill?
It was a trick question.
The fact that you're asking the question makes me
it's a trick.
I'm going to have multiple questions. It's going to be multiple questions. So it's either all a trick or it's not.
I feel like the fact that you said that because we caught you, so I'm still going to go Carlson.
I'll go with
Just
O'Neill.
because I think it's a trick.
I'll pick the trick, just in case.
Okay.
My brain says O'Neill, so I'll stick with that.
So O'Neill 89.2, Dylan Carlson 89.3.
Ooh.
Higher, by the way, both of them higher than Nolan Arenado. Interesting. Hard hit rate, higher, or who had the higher one? Hard hit rate, Tyler O'Neill or Dylan Carlson?
Tyler,
rate.
for sure.
O'Neill.
Yeah, on a per rate basis, Tyler.
Got to be. So Tyler's was 43.3, Carlson's 37.6. Okay. But I will say that Carlson's rates before that, 31.1 and 27.2 hard hit percentage, and his average exit velocities, which you guys know I'm not a huge fan of average exit velocity, but it is a sign of hitting the ball harder. I mean, to be just Captain Obvious there, but his average exit velocity is 88.2, 86.1, and then 89.3. So XWOBA, O'Neill or Carlson, who do you got?
Oh, definitely Tyler.
Yeah, O'Neill.
You guys
For
are
sure.
looking at the stats now, I'm sure.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
don't
not.
bring it up. No, but it is. It's O'Neill 338 versus Carlson 320. And I only really bring that up because Carlson, he hurt his knee or whatever it was, his ankle. I lost track of whatever it was back in May, and played through it. And he was primarily a platoon outfielder this year, so there's probably some split stuff that impacts his hard hit percentage rates and things like that this year. But we went into this season thinking that Carlson had done all the cage work and all the drive line work that he needed to do to improve some of these aspects of his game that we'd criticized going into the season. He did by the rate stats, didn't show up in the performance, and then again it ended with an injury. O'Neill, some of the rate stats are there, the performance kind of got there, but the injury, was pretty significant. So you got to think though, between the two of them, that one of them is going to be a fairly solid outfielder next year if they're able to keep any of them. But maybe by what Marmol said in his last interview, which doesn't have anything to do with either player, but might have everything to do with both players, neither of them might be here. Who knows?
I was going to mention, it does seem like their personalities their chemistry is not there. I don't know why, but when I read the Marmol comments after you guys mentioned them like an hour ago, it seemed like it was Tyler O'Neill. And I don't know if it's because I'm thinking back to what happened earlier in the season. But my first thought was, oh, he's talking about Tyler O'Neill. I don't know why but that's my first thought was, oh, that's who he's talking about.
Well, that was my first thought too. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mine too.
Yeah.
And
my second thought was Carlson. So,
yeah. Is it O'Neill or Carlson? The game continues.
Right.
But I don't see that in O'Neill. I obviously don't know him, but he seems like a pretty hardworking guy. I feel like you don't look like that by not being hardworking. But I don't know. I don't know.
Do we have thoughts on Burleson? Anyone have any thoughts on Burleson as an outfielder?
No
Burleson's an outfielder or Burleson's a hitter?
Yeah.
Burleson as an
both.
outfielder. We're still in the outfield group, unfortunately.
I mean, I don't particularly love Burleson in the outfield, but I'll still believe in the bat.
Yeah.
Even the bat.
I don't ever want to see him in the outfield again. I think
I don't think
I don't ever want to see him again, period.
I'm very happy if Burleson gets on your best. Not in terms of roster. I mean in terms of he just shouldn't be in the outfield ever again.
Yeah, and I don't think the bat
not very often. I'll put it that way.
I don't think the bat's ever going to be good enough to outweigh his defensive negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
So moving on to the DH, then what do we think about Burleson, the DH?
I still think there's plenty of other options where you can play other guys. I mean, he's not the worst guy on the team that he is probably the worst guy on the team of the guys who just can't play an actual position. And there's what I'm trying to say is there's plenty of guys down the line that you would rather slot into DH because they can't field because their bats are so much better. Kind of like alluding to what Blake said. Like for example, if it were up to me, I would just slot DH or Contreras at DH and start Herrera and just worry about everything else later.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah.
I love that symmetry. He's not the worst. Well, he is the worst.
Say,
we knew what you
Adam
meant.
hates Burleson. Why do you hate Burleson?
I don't hate Alec Burleson. I just think there are better options.
Right.
Alec, we love you. You might actually listen to this, so we love you, man.
Yeah.
So first year player though. I mean, do we anticipate? And he's got some pretty good looking stats too. Whiff rates, K rates, these are things that are the building blocks for good players. Do we think there's a step forward in him? And did we see towards the end of the season?
Hasn't he stated himself that he needs to work on better pitch selection to swing at? Because
I hope he has, because he does.
Yeah.
I think he's actually stated that that's what he's going to work on in the offseason, because that's the big downside with him as far as I could tell, because he hits the ball hard. He just doesn't swing at the best pitches to swing at. He swings at everything. And if he could just swing at half of the pitches that he if he could swing at half of the pitches that he swings at there outside of the zone instead of all of them, I think he has some genuine potential as a hitter, maybe even worth playing at DH.
Yeah, and if he can elevate the ball a little bit more too, he'll tap into that power more consistently. So, and I think like the whole plate or pitch selection thing, I think he literally said he was resistant to it at first. Like they told him to do that or whatever, and he didn't want to, or it was kind of implied he didn't want to, and he came around to it at the end of the season. So if he can actually work on that and get better at that, then he'll become much more viable at the plate.
I mean, that's always the things with these players is that by the time they reach the majors, the ifs are hard to correct. Yeah. Sometimes it happens, but usually I mean, how long have we been talking about all Edman needs to do is increase his walk rate a little bit? Well, he can't. He hasn't, and that's just one example of many. So yeah, but he is a young hitter, is a good hitter. And you would think, considering his ability to put the bat on the ball, that he would be able to better judge where the ball is and not swing at some of those pitches that are out of the zone. But seems simple from my perspective, but I didn't make it out of Little League. So, all right. Other thoughts on DH/bench? Anything else that we really care to cover and invest time in? Anyone got any thoughts on Kisner at all?
I was going to say, how could we go this long without talking about Richie Palacios?
Well, that's on the list there. You see it on the list. Yep. Yeah. So give me your best Palacios take, Gabe.
I mean, he's a good, I don't know how you would define his role on the bench, but he's a very good bench player to have because he's a former infielder who looks pretty good in the outfield. I don't know what Fangraphs used to grade him at 20 to. I don't understand that at all.
It's got to be a second base. It's got to be at second base.
It's not that I'm not going to say he's a good defender necessarily, but he looks like an outfielder.
Not a 20.
Yeah, Farm looks good, doesn't it?
Alec Burleson basically out in the outfield. Yeah. Not to pick on Alec again, but he's target there. He's got Juan Yepes in the outfield. How about that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Juan. But yeah, I like him on the bench next year as maybe not the last option, but because we got, depending on who we bring back, we'll have either Donovan, Edman, Gorman. Somebody will be on the outside looking in until somebody gets hurt. So he wouldn't be the first guy off the bench, but somewhere in that mix. I like him a lot as in that part of the thing, especially given his minor league history, where he kind of got screwed out of getting injured in 2019 in the COVID season. So he got delayed 2 years basically. So there might actually be something there.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
By the way, these stats aren't significant just in their sample size, but 214 outfield innings this year, -2 OAA, 370 total, -3. So that's not, I mean, his 20 rating has got to be his second base rating when he was coming up through the minors, but he might or might not be an average outfielder. Probably not. Still though, I mean, for a backup, you could do a lot worse than Richie Palacios. The only thing that I wanted to point out about the bench or whatever is that I realize that Andrew Kisner's the captain and all that stuff, but he's 28 years old. And yes, he had a 92 WRC plus, which is not terrible for catcher. But he finished the season with another negative WAR, -0.1, which, I mean, don't read too much into the negative there, but you're just talking about a replacement level player. And I do not see any reason whatsoever to pay him $4 or $5 million next year and take a spot from Ivan Herrera. And so, Kiz, thanks, man. Good job. Enjoy your time on the Rockies.
Did you guys see the news that Herrera does qualify for another option?
Oh, does he?
Long Island.
Yeah,
that's big.
Eric Gould reported that he's qualified for the fourth major league option. I don't know why he does.
Right, well, then welcome back, Andrew. Oh, okay. Well, that's enough on the bench. Let's move on to the pitching staff. We'll starting rotation, which is mostly gone by the end of the season. So I don't know how you guys want to approach this. You want to talk about players that are gone, or have we moved on from them? Or do you want to just talk about the ones that are still here?
Why don't we talk about the guys who they got replaced with instead of the guys who, instead of Montgomery and Stratton, those guys? How about the guys we brought in potentially, even if they're in the minor leagues?
Yeah, you can throw in a little bit about that. Sure. Yeah, go for it, man.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I just in terms of who was acquired back, who the Cardinals have sitting right now, we talk about this, that, it was a disaster all year with the rotation. and the bullpen really not being able to get on the same page, right? We talked about, or Blake mentioned that the rotation was pretty solid, actually, and I would agree. The bullpen was solid at the beginning of the year, and I feel like they might have gotten a bit overtaxed just because they had to make up a lot of innings, and that might have, messed with their fatigue throughout the year. But going into next year, I'm very comfortable with the back or the front of the bullpen, I should say, where you've got, or I don't know if it's the back end, where it's like your seventh, eighth, and ninth inning, theoretically, those guys. I'm not upset with what we got now, and I think there's a solid foundation in the bullpen to go forward, right? With Romero, Helsley, theoretically Gallegos, I mentioned, and if I'm missing any other names, but especially with the names they got back, with TK Roby, Sem Robersa, I think especially with Sem over the past last four starts, even if he struggled with his commands, the swing and miss numbers were very, very, very eye popping. So I'm very happy about that, and hopefully he can work on that. But overall, I think you've got the foundation, maybe your 3, 4, 5 guys, like we mentioned in other shows where Liberatore or somebody else can run with that spot in the aggregate. But you still need to address the 1 and 2 spots, and, not to take content away from an off-season show. We'll get to that later, but I think everyone really knows that the Cardinals, it's no secret that the elephant in the room is that the Cardinals need, significant talent at the top end of the rotation, and, a little bit of bullpen help wouldn't hurt either. And I think the bullpen help could come in the form of reinforcements from the minor leagues, but the rotation is definitely something they need to tackle this offseason, be it by trade or free agency.
Yeah. Other thoughts on the rotation?
You say, do you guys think Zach Thompson, are you comfortable penciling him in as a 5th starter or not so much?
Nope. I'll take him as like a 6th, 7th.
Right,
But
I think I agree.
He deserves innings.
Yeah, he's proven that at the end of this season that you can count on him as the 6 or 7 guy, maybe even ahead of Liberatore, which means he's going to get 15 to 25 starts because someone will get hurt. But I don't want him. If you start moving him up and then you count on injuries, then he's going to end up your number 2 or number 3, and I'm not comfortable with that at all.
But do you guys want Liberatore in the bullpen all year next year, or do you want him to start in the bullpen and then if an injury maybe increases, if he's pitching well in the bullpen, that is?
Personally, that's what I'd do. Yeah. I wouldn't put him back to Memphis. He doesn't need to go back to Memphis. He needs to learn how to get major league pitchers out. So that could hurt his ability to stay loose. Because I do think that he should be, maybe the number 7 starter. But kind of that depends on, Robersi and Roby and some of them as well. They might pass him by, or even Graceffo, they could pass him. So I'm pretty comfortable with Liberatore in the pen. Blake, what do you think?
yeah, I mean, I think Liberatore in the pen, and as we look at option years, he'll be in his last one next year.
Yeah.
So, and I agree with you wholeheartedly about him needing to learn how to get major league hitters out. So if they can find a way for him to be in the bullpen, improve that way, and jump into the rotation later if needed. I mean, I know that's not always an easy thing to do to build up his arm, but that's kind of the path that I would take. And I mean, even if you look at AAA, you're going to have Graceffo, McGreevy, Robersa, Tink Hens, maybe at some point in AAA. Drew Rahm might be in the AAA rotation. There's a lot of other names who are going to need innings in Memphis, especially out of the rotation, that I don't know if it's even worth putting Liberatore back down there.
Yeah.
And they could do what they did with Palante. He ended up getting 10 starts when he started in the bullpen last year.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, he's hopefully going to pitch better than Palante did this year.
One thing I want to talk about with the rotation, I want to talk about Mikolas for a second. Baseball Savant has this really great thing now. They changed their front page sort of interface, and it instead of the sliders that they used to have, now they have these they're basically still sliders, but these ratings. But it has this really cool function where you hit the play button on it, and it will show you how they've changed over time. And it seems like you could look at Mikolas's stats and say, well, yeah, I mean, higher home run rate, or a little bit less Ks, a little bit less velocity, but he's basically the same as what he's been. But you look at these rankings in things like, fastball velocity, average exit velocity, whiff rate, K rate, there's been a lot of change over his career. He's not as effective as he used to be. I'm very concerned with Mikolas heading to next season. Not in the sense that he can't be a reliable starter, but he right now is our number 1, number 2. He needs to move back towards the number 4, number 5 going into next year. Otherwise, he's going to potentially be a real liability. So I thought Mikolas had a pretty pretty poor season, to be honest.
Personally,
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about Michaelis at all. You know why? Because he started slow because of I think because of the World Baseball. And then secondly, I think he's been treating the last couple months of spring training a little bit, where he's just been working on some stuff and not as concerned with the results.
Well, it shows up in the stats if that's the case. So
Well, I know. And then,
Yeah.
well, I hate to put too much faith in one start, but his last start was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I don't know if like he would have started. I don't know. He's going to be the same guy. He has been 2 to 3 WAR, I think, and throw, if he's healthy, throw close to 200 innings. He's a number 4 rate, number 4, but in innings he becomes a number 3, if that makes sense.
Actually, I would agree with that. I just want to make sure he's slotted in there in that number 3, number 4 slot instead of as potentially the opening day starter. I mean, there's a big difference in expectations there. And I have no problem with Mikolas in the rotation, but there's got to be guys better than him. So.
Sure. There's going to be at least one guy better than him. I would bet a lot of money. There's no way the Cardinals are going to go into next year with Michaelis as the best projected starter.
Oh, you cursed us. You've done it. This is exactly the hubris that got us into this season.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. I don't really feel the need to like dig into the bullpen that much. We've kind of talked about it a little bit here and there. So I'll just kind of throw this out there. Do you guys have any thoughts on coaching staff, Marmol, pitching coach, hitting coach, or front office Mozeliak? Anyone have any hot takes you want to share in that regard?
Go ahead.
I don't know if I care for Marmol's style.
Yeah.
With the media. I'm just gonna throw that out there. It's not my favorite thing. He seems like a pleasant enough fellow. I don't actually even know if he does seem like a pleasant fellow or not. I never talked to him, but I don't care for his the way he just it's either he's doing these things to make a point, and I don't like that, or he just like literally like cannot control him, like cannot help himself. And I also don't, if that's the case, I don't like that either. So I'm not a fan of it, but maybe it's not a big deal. It's just, I don't like it. Maybe I'm bored.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I totally agree with that. And I think, and you could say like, oh, it's his first year being a manager, or second year being a manager, but that, that doesn't mean you have that. That's more of a characteristic where you're kind of throwing people under the bus. And, the role of the manager now is less the tactician and more so now the figurehead. And, because like now the front office is pushing all the buttons now really, and relaying, messages down to the team, into the dugout. But really the issue I feel, now, and if he can't really be that, that chemistry builder and that person who puts it all together, then, what kind of role does he have? But, I will say like the on-field, struggles that they had is, it's not really his fault, in terms of like added value from the manager. It's not like, it's like a negligible, if any impact at all, especially nowadays, Blake had mentioned earlier. Yeah. But, I think it's really just, it is something to look out for. I think the rest of the coaching staff, I can't really explain for them, but there were plenty of examples this year where I could have felt that Ollie could have been a better leader of men, especially in that locker room. And I don't think he was that this wasn't his brightest moment this year. And hopefully he can work on that next year, because, that chemistry, I guess it does have an effect on the team indirectly he does have an effect on the value of the team one way or another, where it's the chemistry or the X's and O's. Going to be more the chemistry, but it is something to look forward to next year. Like, watch out.
To somewhat defend Marmol's press conferences, or whatever you want to call it, I think when you win 71 games and you expect to win 90, I don't think there was a situation where people would like his press conferences, because because Mike Schultz back in the day, people hated when he was like all rosy about the team every single time before they went on the huge winning streak. Yeah. So I understand the different complaint here, but I just feel like he was in a lose-lose situation where there's no way anybody would like what he had to say as long as we're winning some games. They just
I think
win.
that's fair.
That's very, very true.
But yeah, I think that's fair. And I know that one of the complaints people have with managers is they do like, what do they call it? Like Mo speak for Mozeliak speak, where they don't really say anything. But I think you can be kind of more open with it's the throwing the players under the bus. You're like, I feel like the
Yeah.
manager's job, like first and foremost, is to protect the players. And so I don't like the, the specifically talking about the players part.
Also say Tony La Russa absolutely did what Marmol does, but
Yeah. But I also,
Well,
different time
he's a
period.
3-time world champion. He can say whatever
Yeah.
he wants.
right, that's
Well,
true.
within reason, because
He had
Tony
a few
has
more
gotten in trouble.
wins.
But
Hey, I mean, he ran some good players out of town too, though. So
Right. I don't,
Yeah.
Larissa kind of would rub me the wrong way too, but I was also like a lot younger than am now, so I didn't know anything about that either. But I don't know. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but it just is off-putting to me as a person and not like as an enjoyer of baseball. I'm like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
You should
I don't
be
even-
nice.
I don't
So-
even necessarily disagree with you guys. I just feel like somebody has to defend Marmol here. So
No,
There
you
that's
go.
the point of doing this, I think. I think it's good to approach this from every aspect. Does anyone else have anything? I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah. I think
just last. Oh, go ahead.
I think what you're looking at here is a one more kind of deal where, Mozeliak, probably no matter what happens next season, he's got one more year. He's either going to move up or kind of move on. And then Marmol then would have one more year. And then depending on what happens next year, either a cleaning of the house or a changing of the guard. And Marmol could survive that. Very much could. But it's a make or break season for him next year, and he probably knows it, which is probably why he's trying to call for championship caliber players in our clubhouse, because he needs it to keep his job in the majors. So, well, I want to just kind of point out here that you guys asked some questions. I did kind of warn you that this was going to be a content heavy podcast episode, and we were going to try to get to some questions if we had time, and we've got a little bit of time. So I wanted to just kind of make mention of a few names here because you guys took the time to ask questions, and so you get at least a shout out. Dr. Hal version 2.0 asks, give me 3 reasons why the Cardinals underperformed their expected record. I think we gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reasons. So I hope that was satisfactory. London Bird, which hitter and pitcher have been the best surprises this year? We all covered that as well. And I think what I want to do, well, I'll just mention another one. London Bird Contreras, we covered that. There's 2 questions that I want to end with. And so, Heather, I'm going to jump to you for this one. Cool Noodles asked, what is the greatest end to a Cardinals career? What do you think, Heather?
Ooh. I was thinking about this the other day. So this wasn't the end of his career though, but I liked the Matt Holliday home run. And I think it was the final home game before of his final season with the Cardinals. I was thinking about that the other day. Gosh, I think I'm gonna go with that one.
I got to go with Pujols. I mean,
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Going
I go
out
with
the way that
Pujols.
he did, I've never seen anything like it. Yeah, anyone have another take besides Pujols? Anyone an Aussie?
Yeah. I mean,
Aussie guy
that's
there?
the clear one.
Yeah.
That's obviously it. But
Yeah.
is there a
Let's see
pitcher
here.
that did something great? Do we have any great pitching final moments?
Gibby was before my time.
Carp.
Carp.
Maybe.
Well, there's the whole rib thing.
Maybe,
So
Mm.
yeah.
count 2011 as his last season, which
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
Which
that
was
is,
stellar.
then that's it. But
True.
yeah, because
True.
Gibby famously gave up a grand slam in one of his last pitching and bats. What are they called?
Yeah.
Yeah. He ended
Pitching
up
at bats.
getting the next out, like a ground out, I think. But so it wasn't like the last pitch of his career, but he very famously gave up a grand slam to I'm blanking on his name. It's a silly name.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Did he come back and hit him in
In the old timers game.
yeah,
So
the old
that's
timers
it.
game?
You know
Yeah,
what?
I can't remember
That's
who you're talking about either, but yeah.
When he came back and hit him in the old timers game, that's
Gibson
the
does
greatest
not
end of the
forget.
career.
All right, the last question I want to make mention of is a newbie. In fact, there were a couple newbies that I hadn't seen questions for, including Man of Few Posts, Western Redbird, Smithman 10. So I saw your questions. We addressed most of them, but the last one I want to read for you guys. Salt Heart Foam Follower. It's a nice username. Are you guys more excited going into this offseason than any in recent memory? Yes, no. Are you guys excited, depressed? How are we entering the offseason? It's offseason time, man. Let's go. We've done the 2023 thing. Are we excited or not? Gabe.
I don't know if excited is the right word for my feelings because it's weird to not be excited. I feel like there's so much riding on it. I'm like nervous about it.
Oh, good take. Yeah.
I'm more nervous than excited, even though I do believe we're going to get like at least one pitcher better than Michaelis, which is exciting. I'm just they can really nail this off season, or they could just be okay. And man, do I want them to nail it. And I'd be excited if I was confident they would nail it.
Yeah.
Hard to nail it because there are 29 other teams trying to get after the same players that you are.
Right.
So, and usually that's past their puke point when other teams get involved. So I'm just hoping we get, one of Aaron Nola or Yamamoto, and then another pitcher, and then I know they said 3 starters, but I'd be satisfied with just one of those elite guys and another guy better than Michaelis, and I'd be a happy guy.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I'll finish this out here with that. I agree. I wouldn't say that I'm excited. I'm nervous. Actually might be a better word for it. I am going to hold the Cardinals to a high standard this offseason, and I'm not going to let myself be dragged down with poor analysis anymore. And so I think, though, the Cardinals are heading into this offseason with the right motivations and the right focus, at least by what they're saying. Now, whether it happens or not is another thing. But based on what they did at the trade deadline, there's an indication that they're real serious about changing this pitching focus, which is needed to happen and needs to happen. I also think where their budget is, with the amount of money they should have available, they broke 3 million fans again. So the money's there. The budget space is there. I think the numbers, the quantity is there. So even if a few starters go past their puke point, there's that other guy that they can turn to in at least 4 or 5 different cases. We can rattle off it. Your articles did a great job of that, Gabe. There's 5 or 6 different options or more that would be perfectly acceptable choices to improve this team. And then based on what we saw from the young kids, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic going into next season. I really do. It's not going to be easy. It never is. And the Cardinals cannot take the easy path this summer or this winter. They're going to have to go all in, or they could see this again. They really could. So I'm excited. I'm nervous, but I think it's all there for them if they choose to take it. They rarely have in the past, but they've also rarely lost 91 games. So I think it's all there for them. So, well, again, thanks so much for joining us for this podcast. We will be back here in a week or two with our 2023 minor league season review, which will be a lot more optimistic than this one was. There's some good things that happened on the farm and quite a bit to talk about basically at every level all the way through. So exciting stuff for that. So watch for that here in a few weeks. And then we're going to jump head first into off-season content about the time that the GM meeting starts. We'll be rolling on that. So again, thanks for joining us. Look for those podcasts coming up soon. And for Adam and for Gabe and for Blake and for Heather, thanks for being with us. And we'll see you on the site. Have a very happy Wednesday. This is going to post on a Wednesday. So a very happy Wednesday. We'll see you soon.